Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the series What You Always Wanted to Ask. Today, I would like us to focus on a question that's been raised with me very often. That's based on the 26th and 27th verses of the first chapter of the book of Genesis, and it pertains to the creation of humankind. Let me read that section. Just two verses from the first book of the Bible, the Genesis chapter 1, verses 26-27. Then God said, "Let's make man in our own image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. You would have noticed that the expression "in the image of God" appears 3 times in the 2 verses. So the question is very simple, very genuine. What does it mean for human beings to be created in the image and likeness of God? Now, such questions need to be addressed because these key biblical affirmations and insights exist in a kind of vague manner and therefore unrelated to what it means to be a person who is spiritually disciplined or spiritually sensitive. Unless and until we understand, we cannot practice, and unless and until we practice, we cannot understand. And unless and until we understand and practice, we cannot be what we think we are. And that's the kind of gravity that we ought to attach to a question like this. It pertains to the very foundation, both of what it means to be human and what it means to be a child of God. Now, in order to understand this rather cryptic and concise statement, let's take an example. You think of a chicken. It comes out of the egg and perhaps even before it emerges from the egg, the chicken bears within itself the image of what it means to be a hen or a cock, as the case might be. Think of any other bird. No chicken, because it's well fed, grows into an eagle or an ostrich or what have you. A chicken grows towards becoming what it has to be. The question is, who decides what it has to be? Does the egg decide? Did the hen sitting on the egg hatching it decide? Did something beyond the egg and the hen decide? Same thing with a tree. You plant an acorn and from the time it sprouts, it knows that it is growing towards becoming an oak. You think of the cub of a lion. From the time it's born, well, perhaps knowing is a very, very exalted word in this context, it is headed towards becoming a lion. So every tiger cub growing carries within itself an idea of what a tiger should be. In a similar manner, human beings also must have an idea as to what we are to become. Now, in our case, it becomes far more complicated. Though I use these analogies, I have to also emphasize that all analogies have their limitations. Now, the question is, how does a human being know what he or she has to be? Now, in the context of say, the cub of a tiger, the young one of an elephant, a baby elephant, there is a limit to the variation possible. It can grow bigger and enter into the fullness of it. But as far as human beings are concerned, the possibilities are unlimited. Not only they are unlimited, a human being, in theory at least, has the possibility of choosing from among a wide array of possibilities and options. For example, what is it that makes the son of a saint a criminal, or the son of a criminal a saint? Certain important choices made at certain points in time. But of course, in saying this, I am quite aware of the fact that there is a very powerful and very convincing school of thought which completely discredits freedom of choice. I don't belong to that school of thought, though I can very well understand why that school of thought is very powerful and very persuasive. I'll very briefly deal with it in the course of this discussion itself. So, when a young person or a Christian infant grows up, it has the need, or he or she has the need, not only become an adult, which everyone will do anyway automatically, but one who is meant to be a child of God has also the need to grow in that direction. It's not enough that one grows as per the dictates of nature, as already laid down in nature, and that of course is fixed. There is no freedom of choice at the level of nature. But beyond that, there is a realm where freedom of choice is real, and that has to be exercised. But then the question is, how does one exercise that freedom of choice, that is freedom of choice in relation to possibilities beyond what is fixed as the realm of nature, which is what enables one to become a spiritual luminary, for example. How does one exercise that choice? In order to be precise, or in order to be clear enough, let us take the example of Buddha. Prince Gautama grew up in a very affluent palace. In fact, the story goes that his father had created 3 pleasurable palaces for him. Now, what was it that made him take a completely different trajectory and become the spiritual king of the world, as it were? So that's precisely what I have in mind. Now, in the case of Prince Siddhartha growing into Gautama the Buddha, there doesn't seem to have been a particular guru or a guiding light or particularly conducive atmosphere in which he took those very, very vital, decisive steps and made those fatal choices, destiny deciding choices in his life. He just took the decision to leave the palace and to seek the spiritual destiny of humankind. Nobody seems to have aided and abetted him in that process. Nobody seems to have instructed and guided him or nurtured him spiritually. But there is something called Christian nurture. The scope of Christian nurture is taking up from this wonderful insight given at the very outset of the Bible, namely that we are created in the image and likeness of God, which actually describes the direction in which every human being should be developing. And we will not develop in that direction if everything is left to nature. To provide to every growing individual the kind of nurture that is conducive to such development, so that people grow not only into adulthood but also into the maturity of being a child of God. That is the idea. So the idea of being created in the image and likeness of God is a poetic way of stating a very, very important spiritual insight, namely that in the case of human beings, it is not just enough that we grow physically or even mentally as per the laws of nature that operates anyway, irrespective of our choice or freedom of choice. We also have to participate in that process through a variety of choices, a series of choices that will happen all through our life, as is illustrated in the case of the temptation that the three temptations that Jesus faced. In the process of being tempted, Jesus is exercising certain options. He's choosing. And in order to choose, one has to have freedom of choice. Jesus could have gone along the line suggested by Satan, in which case a history of humankind would have been different. So I'm talking about that dimension, which it is very difficult to express in clear terms because these things are not adequately encountered, understood, and articulated in language. Therefore, we have to. That's the main reason why all scriptures resort to symbolic or poetic language or mythopoetic language. So, the reference here in this text, namely that we are created in the image and likeness of God, points to the fact that there is a guiding light available to us if we are inclined to use it. Nobody will force you to use it. A guiding light is available to us in regard to how we should develop ourselves. We can develop ourselves differently. We can also develop ourselves, or we can also choose to develop ourselves in this manner. So, these two verses together in my mind provide us the yardstick for measuring our growth as well as the guidelines by which to direct the various aspects or processes of our growth. So it's actually a signpost to human development. Now, in the secular world, human beings are required to grow and develop in a certain fashion through education, for example, through various skill development, through the development of certain talents, abilities, etc., through networking and through work, a whole package of things. But we can also, and in fact we need to grow in another dimension also, and this is one of the most important insights given to us in relation to that dimension of growth that we need to experience. So therefore, now I'm entering into the second part of my response to this question. People also ask me a related question: what is the proof that there is God? Now that's a question that deserves to be addressed separately, but here let me make a preliminary statement. To me, there's only one proof that God exists, and that proof is that there are human beings. And furthermore, that human beings are indeed created in the image and likeness of God. You cannot create an image and likeness of what does not exist. So either we assume that there is no creator God, and therefore human beings are not created in any image. They are created in their own image, in which case they are not created, they are self-created, or they are just accidents of the natural processes. They just happen to come up. It is a matter of sheer accident that it's a critical moment in the evolution of the world. Something like human beings suddenly sprouted from the womb of possibilities, etc. I find it hard to endorse that kind of worldview. So, when I read this passage, it reminds me of my duty to be the kind of person who, by being human, bears witness to the reality of God. There's no other way the existence of God can be proved. So each human being is meant to be a living reminder of the fact that there is a creator God. But to serve in that capacity, one has to develop oneself in a particular fashion. And what is that fashion? And that fashion is manifested or incarnated in the person of Jesus. If individuals develop in the manner Jesus developed himself, there will be absolutely no skepticism or doubt left in the world as to the existence of God. No proof would be required. Everybody would know in the marrow of their bones that there is a creator God. And it's because of that creator God, we are the kind of people that we are. So that is, by and large, the second insight in this very wonderful passage. So, now for a while, in order to understand this perhaps even slightly better, let's look at science and nature. Now, nature is a spectacle of growth. You can also say, well, nature is a spectacle also of decay. Absolutely. Where there is growth, there will be decay. Without growth, there can be no decay. Right? So, nature is fundamentally a panorama of growth. And wherever there is growth, there is force at work. Creative force, creative force. Now, for example, when a farmer cultivates his land, what he does, he waters the plant, he gives it manure, etc. What he does, he also ensures that enough sunlight is got. What he does is, he ensures that the forces necessary for the growth of these saplings into the plants that they need to be in order to bear fruit or in order to yield a harvest are not hindered, are available. So, there is always in nature as well as in spirituality a connection between form and force. This is a very important part of my argument. First, I talked about the form. We are created in the image and likeness of God, right? That pertains to form. But form always involves force. So, therefore, in order for us to develop into the possibilities comprehended in this expression of being created in the image and likeness of God, we need appropriate force, appropriate nourishment, appropriate empowerment, force. I'm using a neutral word, I'm using a scientific word, I'm using a secular word, force. Now, if I were to use the religious language, I would have said the power of the Holy Spirit. Now, you can very immediately see that the power of the Holy Spirit is the counterpart of force in nature. What is the function of force in nature? The function of force in nature is that it enables a particular form of life to proceed gradually towards attaining the fullness of what the form implies. The form implies certain potencies and possibilities. It has to be achieved, it has to be attained, and that which enables that particular form of life to attain the fullness of that possibility is force in the scientific secular language. The same thing is true about spiritual life. We are created in the image and likeness of God, and we need force, we need energy, we need empowerment in order to attain that stature, and the force or power or resource or fruit or whatever metaphor you like to call that enables us to attain that is this power of the Spirit. Now, this also gives me an opportunity to afford an insight into the nature of the Spirit, because nothing has been more repugnantly misrepresented and presented than the ministry of the Holy Spirit. About that I'll have many more things to say in due course. But for the time being, please understand this pattern. I have found this pattern extremely useful. So when I came across this, when I discovered this for myself, I actually leapt up with joy. See, just as there is force in nature enabling various forms of life to attain to their full possibilities in the physical, natural sense, so also in the spiritual domain, particularly with reference to human beings, there is a spiritual force which enables the human form created in the image and likeness of God to attain the fullness of the stature, spiritual stature possible for us, which is manifested in Jesus Christ. That is why in the Gospels there is this instruction that we should become imitators of Jesus, or we should be like Jesus. I hope that part of it is clear. So, unfortunately, most people in this world do not make use of this power, this resource. Therefore, what happens? The form remains shrunken. Created in the image and likeness of God, but it's like chaff. There's no growth in that direction. And therefore, two things happen. They themselves are convinced that there is no God. Secondly, whoever sees them are also convinced that there is no God. So people who do not develop in this manner become living anti-witnesses to God, or living proof that or living messages or point us to the wrong notion that there is no God. So Jesus is therefore the way. In the 14th chapter of John's Gospel, verse 6, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. What is the way? Way for what? Jesus is the way to fulfilling that potentiality. Fulfilling means attaining the fullness of the potentiality existing in a seminal embryonic fashion in us on account of our being created in the image and likeness of God. And Jesus has come to show the way in order for us to reach that level of fulfillment. So, therefore, just as there are physical laws, now no scientist will ever dispute the fact that there are physical laws. But scientists have a lot of problem when we say that there are spiritual laws. The spiritual laws are different from physical laws, and I have written about this in my very first book on HIV/AIDS. I don't want to repeat what I have already written. But the fact that they are different from physical laws doesn't mean that spiritual laws are unreal, moral laws are unreal. So, now let me close by offering you an aside, because I've already taken a bit too much more time than I thought I would. Now, I said that growth is the common denominator between nature and the world of the spirit. But in nature, if you look at it, there's an interesting phenomenon, and that is, usually we say that the living forms grow. When I was a science student in the lower classes, I think standard 6 or 7, I was taught that one feature of all living things is that they grow. At that time, it didn't occur to me to ask my class teacher, but teacher, there are also non-living things that grow. One example is the formation of crystal, the growth of a crystal, right? Now let me ask you, what is it that decides that this particular crystal shall form or shall grow in this particular manner? Water crystal in this manner, salt crystal in this manner, so on and so forth. Surely the crystal itself has no consciousness, no willpower, no ability to decide. The scientist who is cultivating it or forming the crystals in the laboratory has no authority over it. What is it that decides? It's a question to ask. So there is surely something beyond the scientist. There is something beyond the scientific processes, scientific laws that we are aware of. So this is the reason why intellectual humility is a helpful thing. Right? So let me conclude by saying that the statement repeated 3 times in the 2 verses that I read out to you at the outset of this thinking together, namely that we are created in the image and likeness of God, is an extremely important insight, and it constitutes a signpost, a direction post, which reminds us all the time that there is a dimension to our personality in relation to which we need to grow continuously, and furthermore that the resources or the forces necessary to grow in the direction are already available to us, and that we need to make good use of them, and furthermore that these resources continue to be supplemented through the ministry of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is not fixed and formulated some 2000 years ago. It's a living reality. As Jesus said, when the Spirit comes upon you, it will lead you into all truth. So Jesus clearly sees the Holy Spirit as a resource of unfolding, emerging, unending resources. So all this together will enable us to attain our true destiny, namely to become the children of God. See, Genesis chapter 1 says we are created in the image and likeness of God. Come to the New Testament, the Gospel of John chapter 1 verse 12. To all who received him and believed in his name, to them he gave the authority to become the children of God. Right? So that's a connection that I have in the back of my mind. I submit these thoughts to you, and I pray that you would meditate on this, and I'm sure if you do so, it will lead you to very, very exciting insights and conclusions. Have a good day. Thank you.